Well, this past week, at the beginning of the week, this past week, we had a moderate amount of water in our system. But as our week progressed, our water levels just got higher and higher. So we've got a lot of extra at the moment anyway. Have a lot more water in our system. So with that, when it's like that, I like to run down here on the San Antonio shoreline, south shoreline, get back here in Shell Reef Bayou, all this area back in here when we got that much water in here, because it really sets up very nice because you can fish a lot of different areas in here from different wind angles. We didn't have, we had pretty moderate winds this past week as well, so everything was fairly calm. A lot more water in our system back in here, so it really opens up these areas nicely. So you can get on these back shorelines here. You can get in the little back lakes all back through here and fish all these types of little areas around the shoreline. A lot of redfish hanging out back in here. We had a lot of great opportunities, on the back side of that full moon. Early in the week, we were still somewhat in it. Those last 3 or 4 days of the full moon, that's like the past, I guess, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, we were still in that time frame as far as that big moon shining. So these areas here kind of light up for us pretty well. And the redfish were responsive for us. So again, with the extra water in the system, these back lakes really light up. Now, they've rebuilt one of the roads that were back in here, the Texas Parks and Wildlife has, so it kind of cut off an area. But you can walk across it and get into another one of the back lakes if you so choose. We did not, so we stayed in the really big lake here in Shell Reef Bayou and fished all these around these little spoil islands that were back in here. Kind of worked our way back into these areas back this way, all these little back lake areas here. And like I say, we found a lot of redfish that were hanging out back in there because they're starting to school up. We're into September. Next month will be probably their highest point in which you'll find some bigger schools. But what we found, we were finding pods of anywhere from 5 to 15 in a little group. And then, of course, you still found some singles here or there. But once you found the little pods, you could have some pretty good fun with it. So we did not work our way back into Big Brundit or Little Brundit itself, but we stayed pretty much into the main back lake that's here. So a couple of days that we were there, it was pretty productive. Through topwaters back in there, of course, there were still some floating grass, so you had to kind of contend with that. If you got some single hooks on your topwater baits, you can kind of avoid that to a degree. Still catch a little bit here and there, but kind of the downside to a single hook topwater bait is that your hookup ratio goes down. But when you do get into them, you get a lot of fun watching the explosions and watch them blow up and slap them and all that. But we threw those topwater baits, did pretty well. Again, with the amount of water in there, the double Ds, we were throwing those as well because it was all pretty much waist deep water back in there. So that's perfect for a double D as far as depth, especially if you can control the depth of it as far as how it goes down into the water with your retrieve. Down south, we were throwing a smaller profile. We stuck with the original size and the burner shad size, but that was all in a pretty wide variety of colors. Pretty much the white ice and bone diamond, threw a lot of those. Twisted Tea, Big Papa, threw that a lot. Easy Money, we threw that in a lot in the original and down south. In the original and the burner shad side. And Firecracker was another one. Purple Rain was another one we threw. Color X was another one we threw in a variety of sizes. Primarily the original size, which is roughly 3 3/4, right at 4 inches, and then the burner shad. And those were the most productive for us outside of the the double D and the topwater baits that we were throwing. The knock and tail lures primarily, and the greenback heavy metal had a lot of production with those. Mirror lure Little John's, watermelon red was a good flavor for us. The Truth was another one that was a pretty good flavor for us. Had a little bit of dirty water, or stained water, if you will. So the one called Chicken's got kind of a goldish sand flavor with a little bit of cream belly and a small bit of chartreuse on the tail, and it did pretty well for us as well. So that was the variety of colors and sizes that we threw this past week. Just working the shorelines. If nothing was there, then we kind of moved out into the middle of the lake that was back in there and worked a little bit. Not a great deal of depth of water change. It was all pretty much the same depth all over it. But you would find them off the shoreline, and then of course you'd also find them on the shorelines. We were throwing the topwater bait just to kind of more of a searcher bait style thing to see if we can get blow-ups or follows or tail slaps. More of a searcher bait type of thing to see if there was fish that were hanging in there. Of course, there were. Then we had some scattered trout as well that were hitting on the same baits. Not a great number of trout that were back in there. Of course, still that trout bite starting to die off. By 10 o'clock, they were kind of scattered after that. You'd pick one up every once in a while, but primarily there was more redfish that we're having in there, and that's going to be the kind of the continuing trend when you get back into these areas like that, and you can work that. Then coming back out and just working down the shoreline toward Cottonwood was another one. That's a great location. You got a lot of different structure that's in here. You got scattered shell. You got a little bit of mud. You got a little bit of hard patch. You got a lot of grass. Working all these areas back in here as well. So, and some of that's pretty mushy mud if you find that. So you just have to be smart about that and kind of working all these areas here. And then, you got the drains all the way down toward Panther that you can hit these. Come on further down here, you got more mouths that drop off into these. And these are all great locations, especially if you've got, like we've had the last several days, we've had a lot more water in the system. So it really set up for us well. Wind situation set up for us well. So we had some pretty productive days down this shoreline. Got all the way down to Panther. We worked more on the inside of the lakes, back on the backside of Swan, back on all these areas here, and just kind of fished and it's worked these different areas here. Got on the outside of Panther and worked a little bit more of the shell. And that's where we found a little bit more trout than anything else is on the outside of that. So that was the main thing that we kind of worked on, especially when the conditions present themselves to you to give you different looks and different places that you can fish, which I personally like the more water because it opens up more locations for us to get into. And the fish respond accordingly. Mainly we were trying to get around that minor setting. And then if we fished late enough into the day, we'd get the major later in the day. So those are the time frames that we really kind of focused on and got to, so that would help us out with finding and catching our fish. Well, once again, with the extra water that came in, pretty much it was midweek, I'm going to say Wednesday-ish this past week, it took off and did all that with the extra water that came in. So, again, when you have that much extra water, we were, 0.1, 0.2, 0.3 on the tide gauges. So that's a lot more water that's in the system. So that opens up a lot of shoreline. And then, of course, again, I like to get back here like in the Fence Lake area, all these areas back in here, working all these back lakes, these type of areas like that really opens up. So you can find some different fish that are back in. Primarily, we were stalking redfish if at all possible. And then, of course, we'd pull out the occasional trout that were in some of these. Then you get out here back on the shoreline, get down here to Jaybird. We work back into this back lake that was here. And, of course, one of my favorite back lakes is Sherman's. Back here you got the south entrance and the north entrance. And then really, when that much water's in here, Sherman's really lights up. So you've got all this back shoreline. You've got all these little back lakes that jump off way back into here. You can just kind of keep working and keep working. It'll just take you and keep going all the way back in here. And it's all interconnected. If you got the right kind of boat, especially with that much water in here, you can get all the way up there into Cedar Bayou area. You can fish all this area back into here because all that stuff lights up for you. But we primarily stayed here on the more in the Sherman's main lake here, working these back shorelines on here down to that. And then, of course, you get out on the outer, working from 50 yards out, and that water was fairly deep. I'd say, top of your waist, belly deep area. Then all the way back in here to Spalding area. And then these back lakes that are all back in here, all these stuff lights up for you as well. So we just kind of worked around different areas and seeing located fish in almost every location that we tried to fish. Did pretty well. Like I say, production-wise, the backside of that full moon was better production than what I really kind of anticipated, because usually that full moon kind of drops that bite off a little bit, especially as you get toward midday, something to that effect, around that 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock time frame. But it was pretty consistent. Like I say, pleasantly surprised by that. Like I say, just worked these areas pretty well with both same baits, the topwater baits, the original size down south of the burner shad, the knock and tail lures, the mirror lure Little Johns. I think even a few Little John XLs that we threw in there. So profile and length were all in that 4-inch or smaller size. And past week to really work those types of areas, just get to have our bite to really carry through the majority of the morning time frame. There was obviously, we had our lulls where there wasn't a whole lot of activity going on, and once you kind of see that and you pay attention to that, what the bait's doing, it kind of dies off with activity-wise. So you have to change your tactics a little bit. So that's why we kind of slid more to the burner shad size once that bite frame really died off for us. Again, the minor setting when that full moon was the prime time as far as finding and catching fish. So that's really what we focused on, and that's when most of the time we were catching our fish. Swan Lake area, outside, we spent, I think, one day back in here just working the outer edges of these little islands that separate Swan from Copano, the mouths into that. Like I say, a lot of extra water in the system this past week, especially toward the end of the week. So we spent those times working these areas here, around these islands here. Found a lot more trout on these outer edges like this. And this, of course, this big flat that's here. So this really opens up here. We found some decent fish up here on this grass flat here. And we're still finding trout that's still got eggs or developing eggs and trying to lay eggs. So that was always exciting to see that when you find those big fat trout that are laying up here in these areas like this. And, of course, we got into Swan, worked this whole back shoreline, throwing the double D, throwing the topwater baits. Again, more of a searcher bait from that. And then, of course, we hunkered down and just started throwing our plastics on that. The same flavors of what I had mentioned earlier. All these areas back in here, just working that real slow, real methodical. Spent more of the time on the backside of it than on the backside of the spoil islands, because you get on the backside of the spoil islands, you got a lot of silt that's built up over the years, and that's more when it gets to that colder time frame of the year. You can fish all that, and it's pretty muddy in some of that area. If you haven't fished that or waded that area before, so just kind of be aware of that if you decide to. But, the back line or the back shoreline here really sets up good for us. Like I say, the winds were not great by any means. It was all, pretty docile as far as wind effect goes for us. It was all, 5 to 10 mile an hour, which is ideal. You can set up a lot of different ways and work all these areas back in here. And that's where we spend a lot of time on the day or two that we spent back in this area here. So just working those areas pretty well. Again, slow, methodical process for us. 16th ounce jig head, the down south in both the original size and the burner shad size and the flavors that I'd mentioned earlier. The knock and tail lures, once again, was pretty productive for us. If you haven't thrown the knock and tails, you can pick some of those up at your, like Tackletown or Roy's, and they're really easy bait to work. They got a nice solid little paddle that's on there. It's put off a lot of vibration. They got a timber that's in that tail as well. So that's where it gets the name knock and tail. And it's easy to work. So if you're not proficient with plastics or throwing artificials a lot, those make fishing really easy. So you don't have to do anything but just cast them out and just give it a nice little easy retrieve back. So it's got nice little action on that tail. So something easy to work into if you want to get better at throwing plastics. So you can start with that particular bait. And again, the mirror lure Little Johns and the flavors I'd mentioned earlier in the video, any one of those were pretty productive for us. So we kind of swapped out a little bit. Several different people throwing different profiles, and it was not really one particular thing that stood out more than anything else, but it was just production across the board. Pretty good for the most part. Once our bite frame kind of died off, once that moon had set, and we had gone to even a smaller profile like the burner shad and really worked with that to try to continue that bite as much as possible. And then, of course, we get down to the middle of the day, and that's when we pretty well start to shut down. Everything was pretty much after that point in time, because you can just fish for so long, and once your fish stop feeding, it becomes more practice casting than anything. So try to capitalize as much as you can. We're going to be in the wild card days or transition days now, moving forward up until the new moon approaches to us toward the end of the month. So if you can, and I would make sure that in your box that you have over these next 8 to 10 days that you'd have a pretty good variety of profiles and sizes and colors, depending on what our weather pattern is going to set up for us over the next 7 to 8 days. We're not quite sure yet. Looks pretty favorable for the most part, pretty much what we've had. But water temps have come down just a shade. We're starting out now around 84 to 85, and of course it's creeping up to the upper 80s. So all that stuff you need to keep taking consideration if you get to be out on the water this upcoming week. So set yourself up, give yourself the best opportunity, stack as much good stuff in your favor as you can so you can find those fish.